Today, we're going to be answering one of the more common questions that get asked all the time that doesn't necessarily have to do that much with World of Warcraft, but I think is an interesting topic. That is, why is my name Metro? Specifically, what are the origins of the name? This is a video I wanted to make for a long time, and I think it's a pretty interesting topic. I think there's a lot in a name, like it's defined me. I think at this point, far more people know me as that name than anything else, including my real life name. And it's important that that's a meaningful thing. I kind of feel bad for the people who've adopted kind of silly or embarrassing name, especially because those people might never really be able to be properly considered professional when that time might arise. But people ask are you a fan of the games, the Metro games? Are you a fan of that rap guy or whatever? Do you own a bus? No, none of these are true. It's actually a really simple answer that I think probably a lot of people end up deriving their original persona on the internet from. It's the name of a World of Warcraft character that I used to play a lot. But it's not what you might think, because obviously I have a lot of characters named Metro, but those are named after me. So this story is kind of a long and interesting one and develops well before I started playing this game. Before I played this game seriously, I played a lot of Warcraft 3, but I also played a lot of Halo 2 and a lot of Halo 3. Those games were really my first competitive experience, and you might have heard me talk a lot about PvP competition and how I like PvE competition so much more, and a lot of that is because of my days in the Halo scene. I recognize group strategizing against other groups is a lot different than group strategizing against kind of a static enemy that you can overcome with good cohesion, but those years were formative for sure. Halo teams were a group of 4 players, and we had 4 accounts that were named after garden tools. It was White Shovel, Silver Spade, Gray Rake, and Black Hammer. And we had all those 4 accounts sponsored by Xbox, so they were officially branded accounts that you never had to pay for Xbox Live, and it became a pretty big thing. Well, sooner or later, all 3 of my friends stopped playing, and I kind of just came to control all those names. So when I started playing World of Warcraft seriously, I started looking for ways that I could kind of transfer those names into the game. Lo and behold, my first main was actually a dwarf warrior with a big long black beard and of course a hammer, so we called him Black Hammer. Now throughout the years, I had gotten this kind of rumbling of that name being racist. I remember we had what looked like a kind of a targeting reticle, the sights on a gun, and the background was relevant to the name. So we had the silver, the gray, the white, and the black backgrounds, and the Black Hammer one was a black background with a white reticle that kind of made it look like a cross. So it was kind of maybe a little more symbolic than it was supposed to be. I'll never forget the first time somebody said, "Yo, I'm not playing with somebody named Black Hammer with a white cross as an icon." But anyway, I thought it was kind of a cool RP name, and I still have that character. Never really developed too much of a connection to it, to be honest, but it was the first character that I played seriously. Around that time though, I was looking for more interesting names, and I saw a lot of people, especially in the early days of Classic WoW, making names that had very few letters, or names that were kind of esoteric, they didn't really mean anything, but they just sounded cool. So I named a bunch of characters just kind of very short phrases like Age, Crest, Gallant, and Blitz. And Blitz actually became my first character that I really fell in love with. It was a human paladin. That's significant because even though the name's not relevant, that was the character that I really started to identify with towards the end of Classic and into TVC. Well, then I go to college and meet ultimately who becomes one of my best friends, Rusty, and him and his roommate as well were trying to get me to play WoW with them. They saw that I played WoW, and even though I was playing on Alliance and they were playing on Horde, I knew I really wanted to be able to play with them. So I campaigned for a few days to try to get them to come to Alliance and told them, about how great everything would be there, but they were dead in their ways, and Rusty especially said he's never leveling another character again, so I had to make the jump. Another person that we actually ended up dorming alongside also was interested in playing WoW. I think he had heard about it, but he never really played before, so I said, hey, the 2 of us can level together on Fire Tree, which is the realm that they were on, and we were both big into playing Super Smash Brothers at the time. We played it a lot in the dorm, and there's another whole story there with Rusty. But anyway, we thought it would be funny to make a character duo named Nana and Popo from the Ice Climbers in Super Smash Brothers back in the day. And he was Nana and I was Popo. So I made a Blood Elf Paladin. I knew I wanted to play a Paladin. I always liked the concept of kind of like a tanky healer, something that's like a little bit more support, a little bit less offensive directly, and a little bit more tied to helping the group. Of course, back in the day in TBC and Wrath, that was a really big identity of a paladin. So we got pretty far. I think he quit somewhere in the 50s, but I kept going. I think the name never really made a big impact on me. I thought it would be cool to have like a duo name, but of course, once he quit, it just really didn't make a lot of sense going forward. So I kind of never really felt connected to the character. And I think one day I went to them and said like, hey man, I just don't really think this is going to happen. I'm just not really interested in leveling this character and starting completely fresh. Like I had no gold, I had no nothing. So Rusty's roommate actually offered me an alternative solution. One that is a bit controversial, but I'll admit it openly. He told me that a good friend of his from high school was also seriously into WoW and that he would not be coming back. And he offered me to play his account, which had multiple level 70s on the realm that they were already on. He assured me that this guy was like completely changed culture-wise and he would never come back. And of course, I jumped at the opportunity. Back then, like actually having a max level character was still kind of a big deal. It had taken me weeks to get this character into the 50s. And once our other friend decided to bail, I really felt like I had lost a lot of my time. So I started playing a character named Metrosexuelf. The guy whose account it was like, I don't know, him and actually all of the people that these guys seem to know. They were all like, they tried to be like really witty, I guess, with all the names. And I guess it kind of imparted on my personality a bit. At that point, you know, I really didn't have an identity within the game. But that kind of like tongue-in-cheek humor about a character, it was obviously a Blood Elf Paladin. It just kind of really stuck. And it felt like the perfect name for my character. So from the end of the Burning Crusade through the very start of Wrath of the Lich King, my main was a holy paladin named Metrosexuel. At that point, I decided to embark on a very tall task of creating a guild from scratch with basically nobody in tow. I mean, I had Rusty, but he was really reluctant to join because he was in another guild, and even his roommate and their friends kind of didn't really believe it was going to get off the ground. But having to create those contacts that ultimately became the first raiding guild that I was ever a raid leader and guild master of obviously put my name in a lot of people's heads. So at that point, everybody would refer to me, instead of as Metrosexuelf, as Metro. Of course, it's a shorter version. The other one's kind of a weird thing to say out loud even. Still few people actually called me Met, one syllable instead of two. I still don't really get that. People still do that today, but it became a formative moment in my game life. Up until that point, I always kind of just kind of played it however I wanted. I did do raiding when I was younger and I was kind of just clueless about it, just kind of sitting there getting carried and told what to do. But at that point, I knew I had a drive for helping people, I had a drive for instructing people, and I kind of had a drive for, you know, being a boss and letting other people fall underneath me and me give the commands and them organizing as a well-oiled unit. And a long time ago, that's how guilds ran. And that's what I expected guilds to continue to run as all the way up until a year ago. But I digress. We continued with that character for quite a while. Then things started to hit some rocky times. And as things were falling apart, guess who wants to return to the game? The guy who I was told would never be returning. At that point, I didn't have a lot of recourse. He basically had all the info on the account and he just kind of stole it back without any consent on my part. And I guess that wasn't really uncommon for these guys. They had a lot of accounts that they were kind of maybe sharing around with people in the area. So I don't really think he did anything maliciously, but it really stung because I felt like that character's identity was my identity. So many people had come to call me Metro in seriously difficult scenarios. Like imagine having never raided before and then all of a sudden you're a raid leader of a guild organizing 25 to 30 people multiple times a week. We used to raid 4 nights a week back then. It really makes a big impression on you. So for the next foray into guild leadership, I decided I would stick with Paladin, but of course I needed to go back to my original account, which is the one I play now. So I still had a Blood Elf Paladin in the mid 50s or something on that account named Popo. Again, a name that I never really fell in love with, but I continued to level. I remember leveling through AV. It was actually like incredibly fast EXP per hour back in the day. I think they made some change at the middle point of Wrath and it became like really overpowered. You can literally just kind of run around in circles, kind of AFK in there and you'd be getting full experience. But I remember we reestablished a guild. We started what ultimately ended up becoming the legacy that this channel is named after. And all the while I still had this character's name that I just didn't like. A lot lot of the people who were in that guild were in the first guild. There was probably like a good 5 or 6 people who still knew me as Metrosexual, even though I was playing a character with the name Popo. And as long back as I could remember, I always hated that. I liked it when people were in a guild and like now in Discord and they were called one thing that was synonymous with everything they went by. So my character's name would be Metro, my Discord name would be Metro, and that's what everybody would call me. There's a lot of like, people use a lot of different nicknames on the internet, I guess is the point. And it can be very confusing if you're a new player coming into a group where people all know each other already and they're calling somebody something that has no bearing on what they're actually named in game, and they might not know who we're even talking to. So after a few months of playing and raiding in this circumstance with that name, I decided to get a little creative. I was a broke college student at the time, not much different than now, and I definitely did not want to pay for a name change. So we came up with the genius idea of having everybody we knew report my name. Now, to be honest, I think this kind of still works. If enough people report your name, you're forced to do a name change. This happens all the time with names that are like controversial or that somehow get by the initial kind of Blizzard default thing that would bounce back bad names. And then enough people report it and it has to be changed down the road. So typically that only works for names that are controversial, right? But first we tried it and I think people were putting in tickets and they were getting replies like, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that name. But I completely missed an obvious reference that the name had that just didn't really register to me at the time. Somebody in the guild was actually former police officer and they said, that's kind of an offensive name because of the colloquialism popo that people say about the police, which I don't even really think is offensive, but we ran with that and we had a bunch of people put in more tickets reporting the name as offensive to police force and how they're like, I think somebody said like, my brother's like a policeman and he died and I'm really offended by it or something like that. And Blizzard was happy enough to grant me the free name change, which I took in a heartbeat because I was so sick of being called something that I didn't want to be called. Metro became my name at that moment, and that was a big moment moving forward because there's more than just the name Metro in tow. I remember trying to get that name on Firetree and it was taken already. Ultimately in MOP, they ended up freeing up a bunch of names and I tried to get it back, but I still really like the name I settled on at that time. And there's a little bit more to the story than just what we've said so far. At a formative time in my World of Warcraft life, I was a really big fan of watching Athene. Now, if you know who that guy is in 2020, you might be really surprised to hear anybody say that. He's taken on a really weird persona recently, perhaps just always who he was, but in the day he used to make hilariously brilliant trolling videos. Like, I'm telling you, my entire humor profile is basically derived from the content that this guy used to make. It's also one of the major reasons I got into Paladin. Not directly, but it really did influence me through those years. And his character, his name was Athene Lol. Up until that point, I always saw like if people wanted to use a name, they would often have to put like special characters on it. And I absolutely hated that because as a raid leader, often having to type the person's name in to invite them or to whisper them, it was just such a pain to have to worry about special characters. So I knew I wanted to use the word Metro even though it was taken. And of course, Metrosexual was still a character on the realm. And I couldn't really come up with anything, but I remember how I thought it was quite a clever circumvention of the fact that he wanted to be called Athene in game, but it wasn't available. So he's now Athene Lol. And it was almost a little bit of a sarcastic wit to it, right? And I think even still to this day, some people still criticize, especially my Death Knight's name, that it's not like a very professional thing to say about yourself. Like you're not taking yourself seriously if you're calling yourself that, like you're almost mocking everybody who's reading it. I don't know what people would say, but I have received that type of criticism in the past. But the original character was Metro Lol, and that character is still there on Firetree, still a Blood Elf Paladin. I'll probably never change that because not only is the name synonymous with who I've become and all of that wrapped into it is my backstory, being a Blood Elf Paladin is something that I still feel like is my true identity. And I feel like now that I'm back on Alliance and I haven't played Paladin so much, like we switched to Death Knight and stuff, I have to say that I feel like I lost a part of my identity. I know and have created so many strong relationships that ultimately, after losing those simply to time and the decays that such brings, felt like chipped off parts of my identity, that character's there as almost a museum. And it's hard for me to even log on it now because of how much there is to think back on. I'm talking about 2007, this journey would have started. Now 2022 at the time of recording this. Makes me quite emotional. And I don't know how many people have been on a journey like that. Like I think maybe, you ask people what their name is and they kind of just don't really care. Like they don't really feel like they're connected to a certain character. But to me, as much as I grew to despise the male blood elf character, it became who I was for a long time. And I remember people would say like, oh, hey, look, here's a male blood elf. Like, and that's what, they would think of me. Like, when you play WoW with people for so long and you see them as an orc, you think that that's what they look like in real life, right? So it's still a powerful thing that I can recall and have a lot of connection to, and it feels like, very sentimental still. So that name will always be something that I cherish and that I hold on to, and that character especially, that character is never going to go anywhere. It's always going to have that position, even with the guild gone and everything on Fire Tree left out. It still feels like that character is who I am, and maybe I'm still trying to take a vacation from who I really am, just like I might be doing with the game in reference to IRL at times, but that's it. And then we started making alts, and I just continued to want to be called Metro. Like, a lot of people would make alts with different names and kind of come up with different namesakes for these characters, but for me, I just wanted them to be extensions of who I already was. So we had Metro Haha, which is my Death Knight, Metro Raffle, which was a mage, Metro Splash, which was a shaman, and so on and so forth. But there is still the question of the channel's name, and it's a much shorter story. So at the time, me and my good friend Siler, who was originally a founding partner of this project, and we have collaborated on a lot of things over the many years we've been working together, we saw what the guild method was doing, and a lot of guilds kind of climbing up at that time at the beginning of Legion, the end of WoD. And it said a really good way to build a brand right now is to try to connect something that is already established in the game to something outside of it. So of course, that was the name of the guild that I led and fostered for many years since 2007, since I was in my first or second year of college. All good things come to pass, but that is still the name of the channel. But originally it was One Legion TV, and that worked out really well because of how SEO works on YouTube. Being able to brand your name the same thing as the video game is pretty rare, to be honest. We got really lucky with that. But then BFA came out, and it was like, I guess I'm gonna have to change the name, because obviously One Legion, that's just not gonna work. Jesse Cox's YouTube channel is still OMFG Kata, I think, right? Unless he's somehow gotten it changed at this point. It's like you don't really want to keep your name something like that. It's kind of silly. But I changed it to One Azeroth because just like Metro was my character's name and what my persona ended up becoming, Azeroth is the place that it all developed. So it worked pretty well because Battle for Azeroth and, the SEO situation there. But then Classic came out and, more derivations of World of Warcraft continue. And I figured let's keep it as Planet's name and be a little bit more centric on just the whole universe and not just a single expansion. I didn't want it to feel like I was constantly changing my name every expansion, but that's it. Maybe someday I'll change the channel name to Metro. I don't know. But for now, One Azeroth TV sounds perfect to me. It tells both two stories of a place that I started and a place that I'll continue to finish, growing as a person and developing great connections in a video game that I've played for my entire life and that I'll probably continue playing as long as I possibly can. But let me know what you guys think. I think this is maybe a surprising story for some people. I'd really be interested in hearing what your guys' origin is, your story, and your backstory on your name as well. I wonder how many people are just like, they have a haphazard name. I think a lot of people on YouTube just don't even have a persona anymore. They kind of just are willing to use their full real name. But there's something about World of Warcraft, like when you spend so much on a character that's kind of meant to be a second version of you, and people get to know you as that character, they form that identity tracking that follows them into a real life scenario. Like you meet up in real life and people still call you that name. That's just so powerful to me, and I don't think I could ever let that go. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. I'm going to do a few more of these in the future, a couple commonly asked questions that mean a lot to me. So thank you for following me on this journey. We will see you guys soon.